Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a book unhaul. So I've done a couple haul videos lately, so I figured I had to balance that out with an unhaul. My book space is pretty much limited to these two bookcases you see behind me and one other shelf I have for sort of my TBR. I'm kind of constantly having to get creative and make room. And if I come across a book that I just didn't love or I don't see myself rereading again, I put it in a bag and I'm gonna offer some of them to my friends, and if they don't want them, I'm gonna bring them to my local bookstore and exchange them for store credit. So as much as I love to collect books, I feel like you shouldn't let things that you don't love take up a whole bunch of space either. So I've got quite a big bag for you. So in case you were wondering, I wasn't lying, it is a really big bag. I am. So I'm gonna try to go through these quite quickly and not take an hour to do it. First one up is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. This one was fine. It's sort of like a domestic thriller. I enjoyed it while I read it, but I just don't see myself rereading it now that, I feel like unless you really love a thriller, they don't really have a great reread value because like all the twists and stuff you already know, and unless they're really expertly done and you can kind of sort of go, oh, that's where the groundwork for that thing later is happening. It's fine. I think I have a friend that I think will really like this, so I'm gonna see if she wants it. Next one up, we have Horrid by Christina Leno. This one I gave like a 2.5 on Goodreads. I didn't love it. It had some genuinely creepy moments, which I liked, but I hated the ending. And honestly, I think the only reason I've held on to it for very long after I read it was this beautiful cover. The artwork is gorgeous, and that's kind of half the reason I picked it up in the first place, but pretty cover art isn't quite enough to make me hold on to a book that I didn't super care for, so it's going in the pile. Another sort of recent release that I'm getting rid of is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I had high hopes for this one. This was a book of the month pick. I feel like a bunch of people on social media were talking about it. It was a Reese's book club pick. It was fine. It sort of had like a weird structure where you don't know who was murdered and you don't know who did it until the end, because it's bouncing back and forth between like the wedding night where the murder takes place and everyone arriving to this wedding and getting to know all the characters and their motivations. And it was fine. I didn't super connect to any of the characters or really super care by the end about what happened. So yeah, it was fine. I think I gave this one a 3 on Goodreads, but not super memorable for me. Next up, we actually have 2 books by the same author, and that is Euphoria by Lily King and Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I read Euphoria when I was in college, so 5 or 6 years ago, I think at this point. As you can see, this copy's pretty beat up. I liked it at the time, but I have no interest in rereading this, and I've held on to it for at least 5 years at this point, and it's just, I've literally toted this across the country. And next time I move, if I haven't read it again or had the desire to read it and it doesn't really hold a special place in my heart, I just don't see why bother pack it up in another box. And I picked up Writers and Lovers actually quite recently because I know Noelle from Noelle Gallagher's channel really loved this. And I find that a lot of my reading tastes are similar to hers when it comes to not fantasy books, at least, because I love those and she doesn't really. So I thought this was gonna knock me out. I thought this was gonna be amazing, and it was fine. I don't know. I can see why she liked it, but it was really boring to me. I don't know. It had a lot of really specific sort of call outs to Boston. And I feel like those descriptions are really kind of lost on someone who doesn't actually live there. I've been there, but like, I don't know. So it was fine, but I'm never going to want to reread this. And it's a shame because I got this used at my local bookstore for like $10, which is already good for a hardcover. But this is a signed edition, so it's difficult for me to let this go just because it is signed, but it's taking up shelf space, and I don't love her writing enough to kind of dedicate it to her, so goodbye. Next up is probably going to be a controversial decision, but I'm going to get rid of A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This is a pretty popular YA series right now, and this was super hyped. I heard that it was like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and that the main character was awesome, and it had some like disability rep, and those latter points are true. I did like the main character, And I thought it was interesting how her disability was like sort of worked into the narrative and how like it didn't hold her back or anything. But I hate, like, this is a fantasy romance, and I hated the couple. They had no chemistry for me. So where the romance was like kind of a big part of the point of this book, I just, by the end of it, I was like, why did I read that? And I'm not interested enough in the world to keep reading the series. The third one just came out. I was gonna pick up the second one when the paperback came out, but by the time it finally did, there had been enough time between me reading this book and then that I was just kind of like, I've got so many other books to read. It's just not worth my time for a book series that I'm not in love with. So this one is going into the goodbye pile. The next up is a book that I have also had for quite a while, and that is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. I think I picked this up when I was in high school. It was like whenever this movie came out, because this is the movie poster. It's also a mass market paperback, which, unless it's like only available in mass market paperback, I kind of avoid these now. They're just sort of awkwardly shaped, and it's not the best like reading experience. And I did quite like this book, but it was just so depressing. So I don't think I'm gonna reread it. And if I have the urge, I'll probably just watch the movie, because I remember that was actually a pretty good adaptation. So I'm getting rid of this one. Next up, we have a classic that people might come after me for getting rid of, but Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I picked up this copy from Thrift Books because I kind of went through a phase in college where I wanted to read like, you know, a bunch of literary canon. And this is a fairly like short and approachable one. I'm pretty sure I read this in like 1 or 2 sittings. It's not even 200. It's just over 200 pages. And it was fine. I don't know. I appreciated the use of the word phony in this. That was fun. But I don't know. It's nothing special to me. I know some people really connect with this book and really love Holden as a character. He was just really whiny, in my opinion, and I don't know, didn't do a whole lot for me. Next up, we have a historical fiction novel, and that is Girl with the Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier. This was a really popular book quite a few years ago. I kind of went through a historical fiction kick also in college, and I picked up kind of like the biggest ones at the time. I think there's another one in here that most people will know. I liked this book. Again, it's another shorty. Very approachable and doable, and just over 200 pages as well. I like historical fiction, but it's not my go-to genre. In a lot of these books, especially, you kind of have a sort of female muse character, especially the ones that have to do with like arts or real life artists. You have like a muse character who has some sort of romantic entanglement with the artist, which is fine in some cases, but their relationships are always like very uneven, and this man holds a lot of power over her. So it's, I don't know. It's not something I think I would like as much if I reread it now as when I picked it up in college a couple years ago. So I'm not gonna hold on to it. All right, yeah, here's another one from that sort of same reading era. I have The Other Boleyn Girl, which, again, you have a real life person who was sort of subject to another real life person's authoritative whims. This is about Anne Boleyn's sister Mary, who actually had like a romantic affair with King Henry VIII before Anne herself did, but she's not as famous as Anne Boleyn, obviously, because who is? I liked it when I read it. Philippa Gregory is a really popular historical romance author, but I don't think I would enjoy it as much now, and it's, this one's a beast. This one's almost 700 pages, so it's quite thick, and it's taking up a bunch of space on my bookshelf, and just getting rid of it. I would say there's very few books in this stack that I actually hate. I try to be very conscious about the books that I'm picking up, especially where I have so many books I want to read. I want to make sure I'm spending my time wisely with them. So this one kind of snuck through that filter because I thought I was really going to love it. And the cover art is gorgeous. Just everything about it. I was like, yes, let's go. But I found myself about halfway through this one and I almost DNF'd it. And I probably should have because I was so annoyed through the rest of the book that most of these books don't immediately end up in my get rid of pile. It's something that I kind of consider over a long period of time. But this one went immediately to the pile. It almost went into the trash, and that is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. This is probably an unpopular opinion because I feel like I hear a lot of people talking about this and they love it. Again, the cover art is gorgeous. It's got fat representation. The main character is into fan fiction and cosplay, so it definitely appeals to fandom and nerddom in general, and the whole situation is sort of a play on the last season or two of Game of Thrones, which I think that sort of fandom bitterness, again, is something a lot of people can relate to. And it was part of why I picked this up, because I hated the last season of Game of Thrones. But this in itself really read like sort of self-insert wish fulfillment fan fiction. It just didn't come across as realistic at all. Not that I need my books too. I like fantasy a lot, but it was cringy. The main character is literally Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, who plays Jaime in Game of Thrones, and it just made it feel kind of like exploitative, and I felt really creepy when there's a couple like love scenes in this book, and I skimmed over them because it made me so uncomfortable, where it was like such an obvious mirror for this real life man. So yeah, and the main character, while I appreciate the fact that she is plus sized and not ashamed of that, a lot of the like conflict that arose between her and the love interest was rooted in her really intense insecurity and the way she reacts. I get like society does not respect plus size women and stuff, and like that's part of the statement that the author's trying to make, but like this lady just needed therapy. Like, just a lot of her reactions to things that, like, he obviously was not trying to say, but she interpreted in a way that came across as hurtful to her it was so just blown out of proportion. So I hated the main character in this. She was so annoying, and I don't mind, like, a fan fiction-y feel. I think, like, some books I have where I think actually started as fan fiction, so like whatever. But this one I felt like it was trying to celebrate fan fiction, and it just became like the worst type of it. And yeah, so I hated this book. I gave this 1 star on Goodreads, and I left a really ranty review. So I'm sorry for anyone who likes this one. Okay, now that I got that one out of my system, we have Mr. Darcy's Diary by Amanda Grange. This is basically Pride and Prejudice from Darcy's point of view, which I was obsessed with the 2000-something adaptation of it, like a lot of people, and I love Pride and Prejudice in general, and I think I was interested in seeing what Mr. Darcy's sort of side of it would be. There's quite a lot of time where him and Elizabeth spent time apart, and it helps give you insight into like why he reacted in certain ways and why he did certain things. But this is essentially Pride and Prejudice is in the public domain. This is essentially fan fiction. It was a fun read. I didn't hate it. I actually thought it was quite cute. I might try to see if my best friend who really loves Pride and Prejudice will want this. But yeah, I'm not gonna reread it anytime soon. As I'm going through this stack, I'm sort of starting to realize how many recent buys are in here, like things I've purchased in the last year, and that hurts a little bit, but it's fine. We're not trying to hold on to stuff we don't like. So next up is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I picked this one up for fall, like Halloween vibes, because I heard it was quite creepy. This is the same author that wrote Haunting of Hill House. So I've never read anything by her before, and this was a really short little novella, really, so I thought it would be a good starting point. It was fine. I didn't love it. It wasn't even like super creepy to me. It was just sort of the twist was quite predictable in my opinion, and it was okay. So I'm gonna get rid of this one. Next up, we have another thriller, and that is Emma in the Night. This is also a rather recent release. Came out in the last year or two. It was a book of the month pick. It was fine. My main issue with this one was that it was very telly and not showy. Really, like the whole framework for the story is this girl who's been missing for several years. She comes back and she's being interviewed by the police, and she's telling them where she's been and what's happened. And so you're not actually following that action. You're literally sitting there in the police room and she's talking about that happening. And she's an unreliable narrator, so like that's sort of interesting, but I don't know. It was okay. I think I gave this one 3 stars on Goodreads as well. And part of it takes place in Maine, so that kind of intrigued me, but it's not anything I super loved, so I'm gonna get rid of this one. Next up, we have The Glassblower of Murano by Marina Fiorado. This, again, sort of that part of that same sort of historical fiction kick that I went on a few years ago. I actually quite like this author. I believe this was her first book, and I don't think I actually finished this one. I picked up her other book, The Botticelli Secret, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and that was the first one I read by her. And I feel kind of bad because I think it's her best, and so it's hard to follow that up with any of her other books that just aren't quite as good, because that one was just amazing. So this one is kind of like a dual timeline thing. It flips between the present and like the far past, and it takes place in Italy like all of this author's books do. And it didn't grab me as much. I will forever keep The Botticelli Secret, but I just didn't love this one. Another historical fiction, we have Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald by Therese Ann Fowler. This takes place in the 20s, and it follows Zelda Fitzgerald, who is the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it really explores her influence on his written works and really how much work she did in helping like edit some of his stories and like encourage him to write and stuff. She's sort of this unappreciated historical figure. We attribute a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald's success to solely himself, but really Zelda had a lot of influence on his career. This was good. I enjoyed it when I read it. Again, historical fiction, I went through a phase, but I don't think I'm gonna reread it anytime soon. I don't love F. Scott Fitzgerald, so the subject material isn't like something that I'm super passionate about, but it was something that I was curious about and wanted to read at least once, and now I have, and now I'm gonna pass it on. Next up is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and holy crap, this book is heavy. Oh my goodness. This is probably another kind of controversial decision, but I've never been able to finish this book. I get like 200-300 pages in, and then I just get so bored I stop. I've never been able to super connect with it. It's never been able to grab my attention long enough for me to finish it. I finally gave up and watched the movie a couple months ago, which I've heard isn't like the greatest adaptation of the book, but like it gave me the closure I needed to finally let this one go. So that's what I'm doing. I know this is a really popular book. I know Donna Tartt is a really popular author, but I'm just kind of thinking she's not for me. Next up is a book I've actually haven't gotten around to, and I'm just, at this point, I'm not interested, and I picked it up for 50 cents in the first place, so it's not too much of a heartbreak to get rid of it, but that is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. This is a pretty popular book, and its sequel is also pretty popular. I picked it up because I'd heard so much about it, but the longer I've had it, the less interested I've been in reading it. It's kind of like a Harry Potter AU sort of situation. I have a graphic novel by Rainbow Rowell, and I like that one, but I'm really not super interested in reading much of her other work. She's kind of controversial. I'm fine letting this one go. I've got no attachment to it whatsoever, and it was taking up room on my TBR shelf. Next up, we actually have a book that I'm getting rid of this copy, but I have since replaced it, and that is Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This is the Book of the Month edition, and I picked this one up used from my local bookstore for like $2 or $3, and I figured that was great for the hardcover. But I'm a total weirdo, and if I've got several books in a series, I need them all to either be hardcover or paperback, and I don't believe Book of the Month did Well Played in their edition, and romance books don't typically come out hardback otherwise. So I was holding off on getting Well Played for a really long time to see if Book of the Month had it at some point, or if they were going to restock it, if they did have it in the first place, but I haven't been able to find it, so I'm getting rid of this one. I repurchased it in paperback so it would match the sequel, and I'm a total weirdo. So this is actually a fabulous book, and I love it a lot, so I'm hoping someone else finds this and snaps up a good deal on it. All right, getting to the end here. We have Room by Emma Donoghue. This is a really good book, actually, and the movie is a fabulous adaptation with Brie Larson, and I believe Jacob Tremblay plays the kid. This is really intense, and I don't think I'm going to be able to reread it because it is so difficult to get through. It follows a woman who's been abducted as a teenager, and her kidnapper keeps her in like a shed and eventually impregnates her, and so she raises this kid as a kidnapped victim, and he's never known the world outside of this one room. So obviously very intense, and I did really enjoy it, but I just don't think I'm ever going to be able to reread it again. And I'm hoping someone else who hasn't read it will be able to get it for a good deal. But yeah, this is a little heavy for me. And last up, we have This Time Next Year. This was actually a very recent Book of the Month option. I believe I got this in November, and it takes place during like New Year's Eve, so I thought it would be a good sort of timely thing to read, and this is a romance, but it was so boring. I don't know. Neither of the main characters in the main couple were particularly interesting or likable. They're both in relationships when they start to develop feelings for each other, so that just feels sort of like, ugh. And then like, I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just not how I particularly like my romances, and I'm just never gonna reread it because it was only just okay. So letting this one go as well. And that's my Unhaul. That's all the books I'm getting rid of soon. Hopefully I won't have to do this for a while again. I don't love getting rid of books, but I need to make space for new books on my shelf because I'm obviously not curbing that habit anytime soon. So thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave some comments down below. Are you mad at me for getting rid of any of these? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to hurt any feelings. But yeah, so thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.